Am I? Just a second.
Yeah.
This should help. Yeah, is that fine now?
Yeah, yeah, yes, yes.
Good. We'll just start. So, yeah, Dilip, as a disclaimer to the beginning of the meeting, first of all, I would like to welcome you to our webinar series on life and essence of life and growth. As a disclaimer, we have introduced all the protocols which have been advised by the Minister of Foreign Affairs for webinars to be conducted, and so that we can have no Zoom bombing or any other kind of intricacies. In case there is a voice which comes up, which has happened in one of our meetings, we will mute all. And if it mutes, so maybe you will get a break for a few seconds, then we'll unmute you again. But you will be in the spotlight, so there will not be a problem at all. Okay. I like to begin by introducing, although Dilip needs no introduction, I think the world knows him, at least in India, and even who deal with the industry know him very well. But we will begin with a brief introduction. Dilip, I've known for almost about 20 years now. He's currently heading as the Secretary General of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, called FICCI, the largest chamber in the country and one of the oldest chambers in the country. He is also, prior to this, taking up this responsibility post 2015. Prior to this, he was the Managing Director and CEO of the National Skill Development Corporation from 2010 to 2015. He's also been the Director General of Society of Indian Automobiles Manufacturers, SAIM, from 2004 to 2010. And prior to that, he was active with the Confederation of Indian Industries, the CII, for almost over a decade and a half, almost 2 decades with the CII, where he was there. And he turned his term as the Deputy Director General of CII. Apart from this, he's been a permanent secretary of the industry chambers. The FICCI, as I said, is one of the largest chambers, has about 250,000 members from all states in the country. He's also been, and we feel honored that he has been a member of the Harvard Business School project, which was conducted under Michael Porter, a very famous economist, on competitiveness of Indian industry. He's been advisor to various startups, digital education, skill and livelihood-based startups. He's been also chairman of an engineering institution. He's fellow to the World Academy of Productive Sciences, WAPS, and he has received some awards which I will mention amongst most which have been there. A few I will mention here. He's been awarded the Achievers Award in 2018, which is the most recent, then the Game Changer Award in 2015, the Rashtriya Media Ratna Award in 2013, amongst a large number of them which he has been awarded. I thought I should name a few to give an idea. Now, he brings forth a large amount of experience from the industry in the chamber. Welcome, Dilip, and we will be putting you on the spotlight to now begin. And as I said, I will be asking you some questions on the essence of life and growth going forward. And I'm very happy that you've taken time out, despite the fact that there is lockdown. But I know the chambers are working with the industry, looking at what could be the possibilities. I would like you to hint on them based on the experience, but we will try to keep the board as positive as possible, keeping the fact that we are looking at life and growth in totality based on your 40 years of rich experience in the industry and personally and professionally as well. So to begin with, I would like, if Dilip, you can highlight what, in your opinion, are the key factors which you feel are essential for life and growth?
So thank you, Aman, first of all for that introduction. And a very famous professor actually told me introductions don't matter because they talk about the past. What matters is the current and the future. So I think at this stage in life, when we are all faced with a huge challenge going forward, I think the normal which existed in the past may not actually exist in the future. So the first challenge all of us will have to have in at least the next 6 months, or till the time that we either eradicate COVID-19, or we find a vaccine for it, or we find some solution. There's going to be life which is which I actually characterize in a different manner, an MSD life, right? So M for the mask, which would be there, not necessarily N95, but when you go out, you'll have to wear a mask. When you meet people other than virtually, you'll have to wear a mask. It is not essentially the the surgical mask or something. I think mask will become a fashion item soon, and it will reflect what you're doing. The second is sanitation and sanitizers, because you would have Vietnam actually overcame this in a very interesting thing. They had a lovely video about how you need to wash your hands, not touch your eyes, nose and ears, etc. And you'll have to follow a protocol. And then D is distancing, because you got to have social distancing. So everything going forward, at least for the next 6 months, offices have to be structured. When you move out to your home, you will have to look at restructuring going forward. Schools and colleges, when they open, in July or June or whenever it is, they'll have to be restructured. As parents, we need to actually look at all of this. So the life going forward is actually going to be full of managing complexities, collaborating, because you got to manage, how do you go to a shop, how do you collaborate with people, maintaining social distancing, how do you actually collaborate with people in your office? Only 10 or 15% in your office, and the rest are working. If you're working in an industry organization, or you're working in an education institution, how do you collaborate across departments? How do you collaborate with your stakeholders? Because that is going to be the new next, competition actually happened in an era where you competed with everybody across a whole host of stakeholders. And then you need to actually look at the whole issue of connectivity. Digital connectivity. Normally connectivity was geared in offices. Now in many families where 4 people are working, one broadband connection or one internet connection is not going to suffice. You got to need something. You need to actually form new ways of connectivity. The phone, which we had cut off, will have to actually look differently. So your collaboration, your connectivity, and you also have to be very creative. In many sectors, the normal way of doing business, the normal way of earning revenues, whether it's media, entertainment, in education institutions, or in chambers, or in all service industries, you need a whole new set of creativity to actually create new products, new services, being able to monetize them going forward. And then, you require a lot more compassion going forwad, because like the Prime Minister, he used the vowels, right? He said inclusivity for I, and he talked of universalism for U, right? Adaptability for A, efficiency for E. So you got to look at this whole thing of compassion with the people there, and actually go beyond your business. And the whole thing is, how do you deal with confinement?
Correct.
Because for long term, organizations, people, businesses will be operating in a confined environment, right? In a contained environment, yet a connected is really going to actually be very important going forward in the next 6 months, and for some industries, maybe for a year.
Correct.
Or at least till the new normal comes in going forward.
Yes, so I agree with you. In fact, you come out the issue which I wanted to raise, the second question was about this like 6 months to a year. Now, what in your opinion, how do you define or how do you outlay what is life and what is growth in your opinion? When you see the word growth or when you see the word life, what does it mean to you?
See, typically, when you look at when you look at life, right? You look at birth, the cycle of life. There's education. You start working. Then you retire or you semi-retire, and then you involve. So that's the life sort of a cycle. In each part of the life cycle, there is an element of growth. Right?
Growth.
If you are a young kid in college or in school, growth is how do you grow your knowledge? How do you grow your skills? How do you grow in terms of your ability to learn, which is a part of a skill but different, right? When you're working, typically you look at how do you grow in your organization, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're growing as a person, right?
True.
So organization, you might go from executive to manager to senior manager to general manager to vice president, heading the company. That's one set of growth. But then how do you grow as a person? What are the key elements of the person?
Yes.
And look at growth in that aspect, right? Your
Correct.
empathy, your understanding, your relationship with people, your ability to empower people. Because one of the biggest things that we can do for people around us is to empower them and enable them to excel. So empowerment for them to excel. And how do you get ordinary people to do extraordinary things? That is when you really look at growth. And then of course as an organization, if you're looking at growth, then it's not necessarily top line and bottom line. It's very essential. But how do you grow your sphere of influence? How do you actually look at the nation first, right? The society second, the organization third. Then you look at yourself and your personal needs. So how does life evolve and grow, right? Then when after you retire, how do you contribute and give back to society? Do you actually reach out to people who may be of need of your expertise, or in these days of confinement and isolation, it's very easy to go into your shell and live. So different. If you look at life there, right? What is the purpose of life? For example, very early on in my career, I actually worked in industry, right? And without being unfair to those industry segments, but some of the practices and issues in industry perhaps didn't border on what I felt comfortable with, right? So therefore, I actually switched, into an industry association, which that time was known as AIEI, then later it's now become CII, right? And how do you actually influence the whole ecosystem to look at addressing, life in a different manner? And then within the organization, how do you actually grow the organization to become influential, to change, and those concepts which are very early then have now grown into corporate governance, have grown into ethics and a whole lot of stuff. And similarly, when I was with SIM, we talked about how does SIM, automobiles, for a lot of people, depending on which NGO you are in or which part of the system you are, they actually congest, they pollute and kill, right? So, automobiles were never considered anything else, right? So how do you actually say that automobiles and mobility is an issue? How do you have responsible mobility? and things like that. And similarly, in skills, when you had a lot of people who did not have the ability to grow in life because they lacked the ability to access to skills, or they had dropped out of education and they had no opportunity. So life and growth, are actually intertwined and linked in a manner that is very, very complex. And in each stage of life, there's a different, meaning of growth and a different opportunity to grow. But one thing is very, very clear, that at any stage of life, you can grow as a person. You can grow in terms of your contribution to society. You can grow in terms of making a difference to people in your immediate sphere and in your extended, sphere. So it provides you an opportunity to do that, to understand, to spot it, and then actually work hard, right? And work in teams. Correct. You can achieve much more by working in teams and collaborating. Goes back to my initial point that I made of collaborating, right? To make possible not only for yourself, but for others around you, for your families, for your organizations, for society and the country.
Correct. The other day I was eating in one of the speaking trees, and they pointed out to the Rig Vedas. And the Rig Vedas, they said that if you want to enjoy the fruits and happiness of life, take up systemic planting of trees. Now, planting of trees can be a different connotation for every one of us coming from different walks of life and having different structures. Now, how do you connect, having lived large part of your chunk of your life in the chambers and taking care of the industry, blessing them from being a sampling to a tree, contributing to the whole economy and the society at large? How do you connect these two with the essence of life and growth?
So, an organization is like a tree.
Correct.
Okay. So if a tree is a sapling, there's no tree which comes out, fully grown. You can transplant a tree, but that is different, right? But, some you have to put a sapling, some you have to put a cutting, some you have to sow a seed, right? Then you have to water it, you have to nurture it, right? You have to, if it's a palm, then it can't be in the sun in the summer. You got to take it into the shade. So similarly, if you look at this, industry is very much like a plant, or everyone. What are startups? Startups are actually seeds, right? Depending, it's germinating of an idea. So like you germinate a seed, a startup is germinating an idea. Then you have to put initial capital or initial investments there, and make sure that the environment around it is conducive so it can grow, right? And if you see, some of the startups have grown and they've spread branches. They have actually enabled, while they've shielded the people under their shadow, they have actually enabled others to, seeds to germinate and to prosper. So if you look at every aspect of life, and if you look at an organization, if you look at FICCI, what we are trying to do, right, is to enable every seed and every sapling and every tree that has been planted to germinate, to give fruits which other people can enjoy, and other people can plant and grow trees there without actually, many plants don't grow in shadows, right? So how do you actually enable that to happen, and to ensure that you have a very thriving forest with not only fruits for the people living in the forest, but for people living anywhere in the world, so that you look at it. So that's a very, very simple analogy, taking your Veda concept of of planting fruits and growing trees and applying it to but the essence of life, right, is to actually enjoy doing that. If you don't enjoy doing what you are doing, the only alternative is to make what you are doing enjoyable. Because if you don't really enjoy what you're doing, or make what you're doing enjoyable, then there will be some void in you. You are just, you're like a robo, just doing something because you're programmed to do it, and you are actually uh, working outside your comfort zone, outside your thing. So, one simple thing is enjoy what you're doing, or make what you're doing enjoyable.
True, I agree with you. I fully agree. What, in your opinion, you think is the success mantra for tomorrow, given that there are a large number of challenging opportunities lying ahead of us, and then we have these issues of psychological disorders coming up because of uncertainties which are building on in the last couple of months and in fact years now?
People tend to think that only current times are uncertain, right? Now, every moment of life, every journey, you may begin a journey. Take a simple, car. You start a journey from point A to point B. You drive out, start the drive by being certain that you're going to reach point B in so many minutes. But the uncertainty is that you don't know if there's traffic, or if the traffic lights will go, if there's a roadblock ahead, or if there is someone who's coming in and breaks a traffic light and hits into you, or so you don't factor those uncertainties in a drive, because you believe that when you start from point A, you will get to point B in a certain amount of time, by spending a certain amount of fuel, right? Life is like that, right?
Correct.
There are uncertainties all the time, right? I mean, 2 months ago, right? Let's say in December and January, we were hearing about COVID in China, the Wuhan kind of a case, right? And we were looking at lockdown in Wuhan and things like that. At that point of time, nobody thought that we'd be going in for a 3-week or a 4-week lockdown in India.
Correct.
Okay. So we were planning for life as usual, right? So the first thing is that, if in the times of uncertainty, right, you have to have a definite starting point and an ending point and a roadmap of how to get there. And so if you have that vision of what you want to do in life, or the ambition of what you want to, vision and ambition slightly differ, right? What you want to get, right? You have to actually have the resilience and the foresight to anticipate the uncertainties and create a roadmap to overcome them, right? Either yourself or with collaborators. And then work towards getting to your endpoint. Whether it is restarting a closed factory today, where your workers have all gone back to, let's say, Bihar or interiors of UP or somewhere, and how do you actually do that? It's uncertain whether you come back. So how can you actually plan to make it certain that they'd come back? What is it that you can do, if it is in your powers, that you can create an uncertain or an obstacle as an opportunity and solve that problem and go ahead? So I think the first thing is, all times have been uncertain. At this point of time, because we are contained, we are confined, right? We are not really connected in that manner. The uncertainties and the difficulties seem large. But as an individual, as a family, as a corporate, as a society, as a nation, we need to actually look at it as a great opportunity to work together, and then look at restarting economic activity, restarting whatever social activity we can do, keeping in mind what I said initially, the MSD principle, and overcoming the uncertainties there. Because if we keep saying and keep focusing that everything is uncertain, and we don't want to take responsibility for our actions, we expect everybody, to kind of do things and we don't contribute, then there's no way that in these uncertain terms we can succeed. Right? Okay, and education institutions will be different.
Yes.
You know, you have to look at it. I mean, even if you open, social distancing means that only 1/3 of the class can be in the class at any given point of time. And
True.
do teachers take 3 times the number of classes? There are not that many days, that many hours in the day.
Correct.
So you have to be creative. You know,
Yes.
we have to look at collaboration. We have to look at, how do we deal and how do we improve connect. So the whole thing is actually weaved into a kind of a thing that you need to look at the future.
Yeah, I came across a saying which actually connects with what you were saying. Don't go through life, grow through life. And, that's something which is important. Now, do you think invest in oneself is important if you want to grow and have a happy living?
So, a lot of people, and when I talk to students, right, in college, right,
Correct.
so I ask them, how many years have you invested in yourself, right? Invariably, the fifth year guys or the fourth year guys will say, I've invested 4 years of my life in this thing to be able to become an engineer or become an MBA. Then I say, actually, just think about it. You know, how old are you, right? Okay. So, assuming you went into school at the age of 5, so you've invested 17 to 18 years of your own time. The first 5 year maybe where the parents are looking after you and something, and you've invested 17 to 18 years of your life for growth. Why do you want growth to stop after you've got your MBA or your engineering degree? I mean, a lot of people think that, while you're in school, you study to crack the joint entrance exam or the medical exam, and then you crack the MBA, and then you get into MBA and life is made, right? But it doesn't happen like that. Today, when a lot of, there are multiple types of people today. There are some people, a lot of people in government included, who are actually working 24/7. And I joke with a lot of people that this year it is not 24/7 into 365. This year it is 24/7 into 366 because it's a leap year, and this opportunity only comes once in 4 years. So you have a great opportunity for growth, right? The second thing is that in this point of time, you can use this confinement period to invest in yourself, to grow as a person, right? A lot of people should actually look by reading. Some people have taken a reading challenge. Some people are learning a language. Other people are growing by learning how to use technology, because there are at least 12 different types of video conferencing facilities available, and you have to be proficient in each one of them because people are using. So you have to invest in your personal growth. You can't go out. How do you invest in maintaining relationships, right? Because if you don't have relationships, you can't have growth,
Correct.
right? So you have to really invest in yourself and invest in this time in terms of, see, a lot of people, in fact, it is quite amazing. You talk to a lot of people, their maids and their people who cleaning home are not coming in. And they have to learn how to cook, how to actually, do a lot of housework. At the same time, many of them are expected to be on call for work. So this whole thing of how do you juggle different expectations is also part of your growing process, about your learning process, about managing uncertainty, managing complexity going forward. So you actually can use this time for growth. And what is interesting is that once the lockdown is over, right, you have to take the learnings of this period of how do you actually invest in yourself, whether it's in your physical being. There are people who are running marathons in confined spaces of their home. There are people who are learning new exercise, new workouts. Many people have lost weight. Many people have increased fitness. So this life and work balance that you're being able to achieve, how do you continue, to take that forward in your growth process, as you come out from whatever form the lockdown is and go back into the regular way of world forward.
You see, I have about 3 questions more before I open the house to participants who ask questions. And, we have some people from Japan, from Malaysia, from UAE. I see people from Hungary, as well as from other countries. So given that, I have this question in my mind, what that when you look at governments around, different governments are trying to look at the problems they've been facing, whether it was slowdown before or now the COVID issue or other problem which they have locally, whether it is of jobs or employment or loneliness. Like in Sweden, there's a big issue of loneliness, growth in terms of reproductivity of population, a lot of factors which have been going up with the governments. Now, in your opinion, what could governments do globally to introduce smooth induction of growth and happy living as a way of life?
So, uh, social, every country is, is a kind of a unique ecosystem, right? Each one has their own demographics, has their own way that society operates, and each one has their own needs and issues and problems, right? But fundamentally, what nations across the world are wanting to do, right, is to ensure that people in their country are happy. They have, they're not below the poverty line. They have an opportunity to grow emotionally and economically there. And that everybody has got the opportunity to be taken care of going forward, right? So some, earlier it was the Millennium Development Goals, now it is the SDGs, right? So each country is actually looking at, itself in that whole way, and the leaders of that country are trying to ensure whether it is the education system or whether it is the healthcare support system or whether it is the aged care system or whether it is the looking after those people who are still homeless or who are below the poverty line, etc., or in the education institutions, all have opportunity to live, etc. Of course, many of them, including, let's say, the Delhi government, has actually inducted a happiness curriculum in schools. A lot of people have set up helplines for those people who have a challenge with mental issues. People are creating, neighborhood communities, etc. So the way that countries are responding to the needs of their people currently is varies. But there are some commonalities in the current situation. The first commonality is everybody is working towards containment. How do you contain the spread of the virus within a country, within a city, across cities, across states if they have it, and across countries? So the first thing that everybody is doing is actually working at how do you contain the situation and how do you reduce the economic impact. The containment is to protect lives and then to ensure livelihoods, and how do you contain the economic impact, the containment measures on society in your country. So you're looking at that strategy. The second thing where everybody is actually focusing on is how do you create a vaccine, or how do you actually create something that or enable the creation of a vaccine or a protocol or something that can help in curing. So the first is containment, the second is cure of this sickness, right, or this virus. And the third, where everybody is looking at, is the what are the measures that you take to ensure continuity of economic growth, right? So, and in that, there are different levels of people in the country that different countries are focusing on. So the first is those people who are losing their jobs. right?
Mm-hmm.
The second people are already those people who've lost their jobs and are, homeless, or they don't have access, or they're stranded somewhere, don't have access to go back to their homes. So how do you provide for shelter, for food, for medical care, etc.?
Correct.
The third level is farmers, right? In many parts of Europe, let's say the potato crop in Netherlands, or there's some other crops elsewhere, they have got destroyed. So farmers and food security, and how do you actually focus on that? The next level is the small and medium enterprises. If they are completely closed for months on end, do they have the money to pay their workers if you want their workers to continue? So many countries have evolved pay packages or support packages for employees of a particular company that do not that do not fire them, and up to 1 month or 50% of 6 months, so different depending on the economic capability of that country and the importance they give to that. So they're looking at the small and medium enterprises there. Then some of them are looking at, okay, we need to immediately get face masks, ventilators, protection equipment, and all the medical equipment and the healthcare services. So a lot of people, a lot of countries are investing, including India. India has also put 15,000 crores in the healthcare sector to be able to compare this thing. Then a lot of countries are looking at, okay, you're contained at home. So there are many compliances, many other things which you cannot actually do, including India have eased those compliance, postponed those compliances going forward. Others where economic activity is on, they're given grants, soft loans, to businesses to ensure liquidity issues. Others have done direct transfers to people, including India, so that there's no demand side shock in addition to the supply side shock. So fundamentally, there is a containment, cure, and continuation of economic activity are the three broad areas where countries are actually working at it. And then comes the social aspect of it, which we discussed earlier, because if people are confined and if people are really looking at it going forward, how do you actually enable that to happen? So governments across the world are reacting differently. Some did a lockdown very quickly. Others thought that you'd have a herd mentality to developing an immunity, and therefore they did the lockdown later. Some governments are saying, we can open the lockdown. Denmark has opened schools, for example. So each country is actually dealing with it in its way, depending on what is the density of population, what is the population over 65, how many people are homeless, how many companies in the small and medium sector. So
I agree.
Varies according to it, and according to how the governments prioritize the kind of activities they need to do.
Yes, very true. As I said, last two questions. What's your advice to the youth and the students in such circumstances, looking forward?
So, I think my simple advice to the young people is, this is not a problem. This is not the end of the world. This is a huge opportunity going forward. This is not stopping access to your individual growth. This is an opportunity to find ways to actually invest in your own self, in your skills and in your abilities, and to think about the future. For example, in India, the lockdown in many parts is the 3rd of May. We still have, 8 plus 3, 11 days to go through. It's 11 into 24 hours, that's 240 plus, 264 hours. You'll never get these 264 hours to be able to think about yourself, to think about your future, to invest in yourself, and how to create crisis into opportunity. There is no dearth of opportunity today. It is not what worked in the past may necessarily work in the future. It is a new system. One of the biggest successes of all startups was disrupting the way traditional businesses worked. Now, there's been a global disruption of businesses. There's a huge opportunity for young people to look at ways and means to actually start new businesses, reinvent old businesses, be creative, and actually collaborate to make the world a better place to live. Actually, the young people can do it. And that is the greatest opportunity. And I think is where they should focus.
No, I agree with you. I think that's very important that we look at it as an opportunity, and the youth is positive and has a positive bent of mind to take this forward, because they are the ones who will lead the nation tomorrow. One last question, as I said, which is that, India has been one of the largest democracies in the world, with having appropriate rules, regulations, a country which is still largely agrarian. We see a country which WHO came out with new norms for hygiene. Large number of these norms have been adopted under various circumstances in this country from time to time. A country which has been bustling for thousands, 10,000s of years in different terrains of difficulties and structures which have come, whether it is invasion or it is climate or anything else. And we saw recently that the IMF actually projected that the India would be the fastest growing economy with about 1.9% GDP growth in 2020, which means January to December 2020, and about 7.4% 2021, that is January to December 2021. Now, do you think, and although other estimates are there which range from 1.7% to 4% with ADB, World Bank, and OECD and other agencies doing the structuring, the nomenclature, and factoring the growth per se. But do you think this is an optimistic view? You've known India, you've seen world around. Do you think it is optimistic, or it is subdued? We have much more potential.
So the first comment I'd like to make is that any prediction about growth rates for this year and for next year, which are currently being made, will be reviewed going forward. Correct. Because everything, all the different elements or the leading indicators or whatever anybody is using to create those predictions at this point of time are actually changing on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. I'm sure nobody actually thought that in the last day of the settlement period, crude oil will actually be negative, that people will actually pay you to buy oil and transport it out. Okay. Correct. So I think the first statement I'd like to actually make is that any prediction made about the growth of the economy nationally at this point of time is subject to upward, downward revision depending upon the nature and extent of the lockdown going forward, right? If the lockdown goes from May 3rd to May, June, that means you lost the first quarter, April, May, June. That means 30% is on a broad scale, 30% is gone. So if you were growing, if you are planning to grow at 6%, so then, whatever happens, and it'd be a whole kind of thing. If you're thinking that we'll grow at 2.5% because the lockdown is going to end in April and then it goes down, so it'll be revised downwards, right? But, people are doing scenario forecasting. So people are saying it will be 1.5. If lockdown is extended further, you could actually go much lower. And if lockdown is extended much further, you might go down even further, right? Mm-hmm. But that is not what this is about, right? Going forward, there are two elements of, you were actually talking about three different ways of growth. You were talking about the U-shaped recovery, the V-shaped recovery, the thing that you have talked about, the IMF and everybody, and the World Bank, kind of situation, or the IMF situation is looking at a V-shaped recovery, right? There could be a W-shaped recovery now. People are talking about W-shaped recovery, right? People are actually talking about 1918 and the Spanish flu pandemic, where the Spanish flu actually reoccurred in winter, right? So while global predictions and growth about the economy may differ, right? We as a country, right, India as a country needs to actually focus on which parts of the country where there is no COVID, how can we isolate them? How can we get economic growth going? What are the new patterns of trading or moving goods across domestic borders, district borders, national borders, right? To ensure that economic growth is there. Contain the virus, tightly squeeze the containment zones, create a system by which we can get back to economic growth. And if we're able to do that, then there's no reason why we can't look at 21-22 at 7% growth or more. Because the way the growth figures work, right? You're looking at the growth over this year, right?
Correct.
Okay. So, if you were to say, if this year we were doing 6% and next year we'll do 7%, maybe not, right? But because the growth figures are there, it is a very positive outlook. I think, when the RBI governor announced his package of measures, the thing that I said was, this is very important from three aspects. First, it's actually infused liquidity in the system. Second, it's actually allowed the banks to lend and the borrowers to borrow. And the third, most importantly, was it was a lift to the sentiments, because it talked about a V-shaped recovery, talked about India going to 7.2% growth going forward. So as a country, as people, we should put our shoulder to the wheel to collaborate to ensure that we get the highest rate of growth possible when we come out of this lockdown, and in a manner that we contain the spread of the disease, and the actions that government and industry take in India become a model for the world.
I'm very happy. Now, I'll open the house for questions to participants. I had Professor Dr. Junzo Watada who wanted to ask a question. He happens to be from Waseda University, Japan, but is currently working as emeritus professor and head of the department in Petronas University in Malaysia. I now unmute Dr. Watada if he can kindly ask his question. And I'll request others to raise their hands so that I can bring them in.
Okay, thank you very much, the Professor Sama, the giving me to ask the honorary question. I used to ask how can I say, political situation. Can you hear? Can you hear?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay. I think all countries want to self-education, like people. We would like to develop ourselves to industrial countries. It is the same as India. India was originally agricultural country. Also, United States is agricultural country. Of course, they have good industries. They want to export industrial products, same as Japan, Korea, China, United States, as well as India. That they require globalization equivalent to export. Then they ask, for example, United States ask export their own agricultural products to India, to Japan. Japan should accept without a tax to accept agricultural product. It does not work well in Japan. We should keep agricultural industry well. It is quite important for all countries. So what should we do? So I do not have any answer, but the economy requires globalization. Without globalization, economy cannot run well. How do you think?
So thank you, Professor Watada, for that question. I think the first thing that this current situation has done is to rethink the concept of globalization. Right? So, I think globalization, and like people have said, there's BC and AC, that before COVID and after COVID, the way globalization is seen going forward will be slightly different from what the globalization was seen in the past. So, the first thing is a lot of supply chains that were disrupted because of this virus, where the mantra was getting to global supply chains and, do a lot of stuff. Now people are saying that at least for critical element, we should have end-to-end kind of supply chain within the country. So like the US did reshoring, out from offshoring in the past, a lot of people will do that. I think the agriculture issue and trade in agriculture and all is a bigger issue because, most of the disputes, even if you take US and India, one of the most sticking points is the export of agricultural produce from the US to India, or allowing, if I say New Zealand or Australia or others, look at the milk issue in India. So I think each country will now develop its own system of how to engage with other countries globally, and how to look at their things in the global supply chain. India does have a Make in India program, and for example, Japan has started this thing about given a large amount of money for companies to locate back into Japan and into third countries. So you will see a lot of that actually happening, because people want to be assured that if any part of the world is impacted in this manner in the future, at least production and agricultural produce, etc., is available. So it's a very short answer to a very difficult question, but we will only know how governments do this in the future when negotiations start. And I think that's at least 6 to 8 months away.
We had Dr. Mahesh Singh, who was representative of the European Union and Netherlands, and is from Hungary. He is now the vice rector of a university. I wonder if he's still around, if he still wants to ask a question, or we'll take it later. I don't see maybe something is wrong, but then we have another one who wants to ask a question. Is Dr. Yamini still there? Yes. Dr. Yamini, can you have you to ask a question?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chenoy. My question to you is, what kind of a leadership do you think can steer the industry through the difficult times of recession and the crisis today? And what would be its expectations from the government and the other stakeholders?
So, if I were to look at what companies are doing at this point of time, I think the first thing that everybody is doing around is conserving cash. Okay. You have to have a very clear financial, strategy and direction going ahead, because that is most important. Because access to capital is going to be difficult. Demand may not pick up. So how do you actually address that demand? The second thing which everybody is looking at is how do you restart businesses, and how do you redraw business plans to meet whatever demand cycle that you project. There are some sectors which don't see even getting back into the new normal in a 2-year period. There's some who actually, are looking at even capital now because they need to expand, because their businesses are, whether it is you're in the pharmaceutical business, or whether you are in the healthcare business, or if you are doing equipment that actually is protective, or ventilator, etc. So the second key thing that companies are looking at, how do you restart, and how do you actually look at and the third is that everybody is reviewing the product portfolio. What is the product, or what is the product portfolios? Do we need to get something new? Do we need to do something differently? And of course, the fourth is that people are looking at their whole distribution chain and aspect there. So, you know, these four things of financial leadership, product, differentiation and product, this thing, getting your company back into operation and looking at the future of your business is what most corporates are actually doing. And it's not necessarily that every corporate has all the four skills with CEO has all the four skills with them, but they're building teams, they're collaborating. I think there's never been so much communication amongst the top leadership of companies in the recent past that has been there over the recent few months. So it is a different type of style which is happening, and then leaders are really looking at their businesses, going forward.
We had another professor, Rekha Jagannathan, who wanted to ask the question, but I think she's logged out, so you asked me to ask. She's worked on public finance issues. So do you think the fiscal prudence which is required by the government and the monetary prudence which is being done by the RBI, they are going hand in hand, lately, given to meet up the requirements of the Indian economy?
So actually, there have been two announcements by RBI, two announcements by the finance minister. I think a third announcement by the finance minister is due to look at, what could be the measures that could help different levels of industry sustain the crisis. So the first one is that, there's a liquidity issue. While the RBI has deferred moratoriums on repayment, they have not deferred interest. So we need a new interest kind of a package from that. For the small and medium industry who have actually paid a lot to their labor in the last few months, they need help. So whether it's the ESI or whether, the EPF payment was restricted to firms employing up to 100 people, where 90% people drew less than 15%. So that whole thing has to be looked at differently. Different sectors, if you look at the sector, if you look at airlines, they're paying ground, they're paying rent, they're paying other aspects at the airport. So every sector has a different set of issues, but the common set of issues are really relating to, liquidity, the cost of capital, the ability to run their businesses going forward. And that is the fiscal thing that we are seeing, that I think industry is hoping to come in from the finance minister, across the board. Like, for example, yesterday, the US has announced a package for the small and medium industries. And it's also unfair to compare countries and their packages, because if you say the US package is $3 trillion, the GDP of India is not $3 trillion. So we can't obviously do what the US has actually done. So I think, but there is need required there for, companies, because a lot of companies will be out of cash. So it's like, your car is run out of petrol and you're stranded, right? And you don't have any money in your wallet, right? You need some money to be able to restart your car and, maybe complete the deliveries, earn some money and repay the money and not being charged interest and things. So yeah, that's a very simple analogy to actually give at this point of time. So we are expecting something to either come out today, late today, or tomorrow or day after. And I think the government is working at it. It has to be a very different package focusing at different levels of industry. But the small and medium industry need cash infusion, need support to pay their labor, right? Need money to restart. And then, of course, we would also need a demand side push, because the current 1.7 lakh crores that has actually been given is perhaps not going to sustain them more than 2 months or whatever it is. So we'll have to see some combination of that going forward.
True. The last question, we have lots of questions there, but at least I see I see an entrepreneur, Dr. Ira Ratna, who works in the healthcare zone. I wonder if she would like to ask some question as an entrepreneur who's been working in this sphere. Dr. Ira Ratna.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aman and Dr. Chenoy. It was wonderful listening to you. And what you spoke about collaborations is something that I have been looking at, the past 2-3 days, and I was quite hesitant. I'm really quite hesitant as a diabetes educator into reversing, like how do I kind of collaborate, and would it be currently when people are in a lockdown phase, and post that also when there's so much of there might be that the loyalties towards the doctors or towards the service industry might go down. How do I fix myself for collaboration? I really wish you could say a little more on that. Yeah.
Actually, this is a huge opportunity for you, because the lockdown, a lot of people are not exercising. A lot of people, and India is the diabetes capital of the world, right? So, at this point of time is to actually look at what you can, small things that you can develop, record small videos, find some creative ways to communicate what you're doing, right? And to share it with your circle and get them to share it. And if it is useful, a lot of people will come back to you. So, let me give you an example of it's an institution in Bombay that deals with people with disability. So the first thing that they did, they actually called each one of their patients and said, do you have a problem? Do you have this thing? You can't come in here. Is there any way, can we set up a conversation? Can we actually do that? So initially it was all free, but then the patients and their parents said, but if you had come to your clinic, you'd have charged us. So is there any way we can pay you? Okay. So there is a way, first thing you have to build confidence. You have to build that connectivity, right? And you have to reach out to people and to show your compassion for them. The initial words that I used when I began, right? And then people will come and they'll collaborate with you. You'll be amazed if you put it in your WhatsApp group, 10 other people will forward it. Then you might have unknown people sending a message, hey, doctor, this is what it is. What can I do? So there are ways of actually operating of that. And it's not very difficult to record a video. You can do it on your phone. A lot of bites that you see of, let's say, me on television, I've never been to the television studio. I just recorded it on my phone and WhatsApped them and I played it. So there's a different way of communicating, a different way of collaborating, a different way of helping people, and showing that you care for them, you're compassionate about them. And, nobody will forget. And this times of challenge, that how you actually reached out to them and helped them going. And that will help you when the lockdown changes and people get back to normal.
Thank you, Dilip. We have over exceeded our time, and I've taken a lot of your time, in fact. But since there were so many interesting questions, I wanted them to be answered by you. I'm very thankful. In any case, this discussion which you've had would be there on the YouTube channel of IIF as well as on the Facebook. I like the other previous ones. And I hope we can contribute, because the whole essence of getting this exercise is getting a positivity and trying to build upon, a more healthier life, people seeing light at the end and trying to build on that. And as you rightly pointed out, I think we need to work hard for it. We need to structure it and we need to go forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.